The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hello, my name is Tom O'Neill, and today we have a discussion with Joe Shapiro, who is the author of No Pity. Joe, to start things out, the American Disabilities Act was arguably the most sweeping civil rights act in the history of our country. What does it guarantee, and are Americans complying with it for the most part? And do you think there'll ever be, or can there ever be, full compliance?
Well, it certainly was the most sweeping civil rights act since the 1964 Act that granted protection against discrimination to Black Americans, to women, to ethnic and religious minorities. The ADA does the same thing for people with disabilities. It says that a restaurant can't refuse service to a person with cerebral palsy. That happens. That a store has an obligation to make its building accessible if that's done at a reasonable cost, what the Justice Department calls cheap and easy. It requires bus systems to buy new buses that have wheelchair lifts on them. Many businesses indeed have complied with the ADA very eagerly, and they've gained new employees, new customers, and they've gotten good publicity. The main titles of the Americans with Disabilities Act went into effect in 1992, so it's a little bit too soon to tell how well it's being put into effect. Something that's interesting, the Americans with Disabilities Act was this major civil rights victory, but it came without all of the publicity, without all the attention, without all the protests that we think of with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, where you had the civil rights movement very involved, and you had freedom rides, and you had the Martin Luther King's March on Washington, you had lunch counter sit-ins. There was a lot of attention, a lot of events that really raised the public consciousness of a very guilty nation. And then, after that struggle, you had this very important piece of civil rights legislation in 1964. With disabled people, it's sort of the reverse. Because they're very powerful as a grassroots movement, they got their civil rights law passed first. And now they have to really sort of educate Americans who don't really know what the law is or why it's needed. They have to explain why disabled people need civil rights protections, why they're such an isolated community, such a segregated community, and what their aspirations are for having full opportunities and to work and to go to school and live just like everyone else. So I think the main thing that may stand in the way of the ADA really succeeding is this lack of knowledge that we have about what the disability rights movement is, why it's needed, and what are the problems that disabled people face. We think of the ADA as something that, well, it was just something to put ramps into buildings, but we don't think of some of the broader ways that we may have to change our the way we live our lives. For example, the ADA may affect healthcare reform as we're talking about it now in this country. It raises questions about rationing. Oregon tried to do a Medicaid rationing plan, which the original version was vetoed or blocked by President Bush because there was a feeling that it blocked the Americans with violated the Americans with Disabilities Act because it treated disabled people differently than other people. It gave them less. It cut off health care. It discriminated on the basis of a disability. So it really is something that is going to affect our lives in many ways, and in many ways that we haven't thought about.
Yeah, in No Pity, you talk about injustices that have been done by institutions and nursing homes. Could you tell us about your own experience in helping your friend Jim from Faribault?
Sure. I had been a student here in Minnesota at Carleton College and graduated in 1975. And when I was there, I was working with somebody who was a resident at Faribault. He was 14 years old at the time. His name's Jim, and he was on a list of people to get out of the institution and go live with a foster family or in a group home. And as I was writing my book about the disability rights movement, I met a lot of people who made me think of Jim. I'd lost contact with him. I graduated college and went on, and it had been 16 years since I had seen him. And as I was writing, I found people with developmental disabilities who were living very successfully in either their own apartments or in group homes. They were in jobs, in mainstream jobs and good jobs, earning good money. And I thought about Jim, and I wondered if this promise had been kept to him, this promise to get out of the institution and be in the community. And I thought that I would find him in Minneapolis, and I looked in the phone book for him and didn't find him. And I was trying to figure out, well, how will I find him? I want to write about him as a success story, and that's what I expected. Well, as it turned out, he was still at Faribault, still in the same cottage that he had been living in 16 years before, still waiting to get out. And he had not really had anyone advocating for him, and I think he sort of fell through the cracks. So I flew out to Minnesota to see him and had a reunion after all this time and reestablished a relationship with him, a friendship with him. And I showed him some programs, some innovative programs that are out there, and took him to see some nice group homes and to see some jobs that he could do, and spent several days with him. And he said yes, he was ready to get out of the institution, and I said I would help him. Basically, what happened was I put together with a lot of help from lots of people from all over the social service system, for people at Faribault, people at the University of Minnesota, Colleen Wick of the Governor's Planning Council on Developmental Disabilities, Jim's family, people who knew him, social workers from Hennepin County who had worked with him. We all got together and we had what's called personal futures planning sessions, where you bring people who know somebody like Jim together, and we brought Jim. Jim was at the center, and we tried to talk to him and get him to talk about actually his vision for his future, his goals. And we did that. It was very successful. And we managed to make this big, cumbersome system work, and it was determined that indeed Jim wanted to get out. And he did. We succeeded in getting him out. And he is in a very small group home with 2 other men, and very happy, living very successfully. He has a job, and he's working almost full time, making good money, and working as a taxpayer. He's paying taxes now. It costs the state less. It costs Hennepin County and the state almost, I think, $100 a day less for him to be out, because the group home's less expensive than a large institution, and again, he's paying taxes. Now, one thing that's interesting about Jim is that he is a very talented. He has some mechanical brilliance, even though he is classified as having mild retardation. He actually has this mechanical intelligence that's quite impressive, and he makes incredible go-karts and sophisticated things, cars models out of wood and wheels and junk that he finds. And in fact, he's working now at an auto auction and doing a lot of cleaning up, but also working some on, I think, getting some of the cars cleaned up and ready for sale.
Yeah, I find it almost very difficult to believe that, 19 years he was on a list to get out of an institution?
Yeah, well, I think it shows that it's hard, unless you really have somebody advocating for you, you can fall through the cracks of that system. There are a lot of people getting out. There's a long waiting list of people to get out. A large percentage of the people that are at Faribault are from Hennepin County, and often if you come from a big city, you're competing with a lot of other people to get on waiting lists, and that's true across the board in the social service system. You mentioned nursing homes. For people, 10% of the people in nursing homes are younger people, working age people. And often, almost always, these are people who could live on their own in their own apartment and maybe go back to work, but they need someone a couple hours a day to do some small basic things for them, help them transfer out of bed, help them get dressed, help them cook. And that's all it takes for these people to live independently. But our social service system is so it's antiquated. It's based on old assumptions from the 60s that the best thing we could do for a severely disabled person was just let them care for them, let them live in a nursing home. So Medicaid is very generous. We pay for all the costs of letting someone live in a nursing home, which averages $35,000, $40,000 a year now. But we don't pay the small amount, a few hours a day, that would let somebody live independently. Most states now have programs like that, but they get just a fraction of the funding that institutions and nursing homes get, and there are long waiting lists. So parents try to get their kids in these programs, individuals try to get in these programs, and it takes a long time to get out. And I think that's what happened to Jim. If there's not a lot of pressure, one person advocating for that individual person, you fall to the bottom of the list.
Okay. As a journalist for U.S. News and World Report, can you tell us how you got interested in the subject and how did you do the research for this book?
Well, I cover social policy issues for U.S. News and World Report, and I got a call from a woman who wanted me to go write about a group that was covering the Americans, a group that was writing the Americans with Disabilities Act, and this is January of 1988, and it was an obscure federal commission on disability, 13 people, all appointed by Ronald Reagan. And I went to this meeting, and here were 13 Reaganites talking about we need a civil rights bill. And so here was this administration that was really hostile to the issue of expanding civil rights, and here were 13 Reaganites saying we need an Americans with Disabilities Act. So that was intriguing, but I'm not sure that I quite understood what they were talking about. And they were meeting in a hotel, and as I left the hotel, I got in a line to take a taxi, and there were two taxis, and a man came up behind me in a wheelchair, and the first taxi picks me up. Second taxi sees the guy in the wheelchair behind me and does a U-turn and goes off down the avenue and leaves this guy stranded. And I remember turning around in the taxi, and in my taxi, and looking at this guy, and something sort of clicked. I started thinking, well, if he can't get a taxi, how does he get to work or get home? Washington has buses, but they don't always have wheelchair lifts. We have a subway system that's pretty accessible, but it only goes certain places. So that would circumscribe where he works and where he lives, or if he can even work. If he can't work, then would we even try to give this guy a decent education? If we don't think he's worth educating, then what's our assumption? That he should just live on welfare all the time? In fact, those are the issues that disabled people face. And that idea of being passed up by a taxi cab, that's an example of the type of mindless exclusion, the type of discrimination that disabled people deal with every day in their lives. But for me, it was an epiphany, and it really made me start thinking about these issues. I went back to my office and I wrote that story, and I found that I kept coming back to disability issues, and it was a source of great stories for me. And what was particularly interesting was that there's this thing out there, this movement, this Americans with Disabilities, this disability rights movement that had not been getting very much attention at all. Reporters weren't writing about it, Americans weren't familiar with it, and I set out to write about it. I was helped, by the way, by a one-year fellowship, a journalism fellowship I had called the Alicia Patterson Fellowship.
I see as one of the strengths of your book is presenting the disabled as ordinary people facing a unique set of challenges and obstacles set up by the rest of society. Could you comment on that and the purposes of your book? Was that one of them?
Well, I would say that probably the main purpose of the book is I'm trying to bridge this gap, which I think is very broad, between disabled people and people who aren't disabled. I think that non-disabled people simply don't understand.
Well, I, for one, did not.
Well, it's because all of the images that we get in our society of disability fall into what I divide, call two myths. So the myth of the poster child, which is that a person with a disability leads a life that's tragic, unhappy, that the person is dependent, childlike. It's always poster children. And the other myth is the myth of the supercrip, which is a word that disabled people use pejoratively to refer to this idea that non-disabled people always expect disabled people to inspire us, and we want to know about the guy with one leg who's jogs across California or something like that.
Canada, yes.
Right. There was
Yes,
there was a guy. That's right. Terry Fox across Canada. We're looking for inspiration from disabled people. Now the problem with those myths, well, the first one, the poster child, is that again it presents that person is not capable. A disabled person is needing charity. And the idea of the supercrip sort of suggests that a disabled person does not deserve our respect until he or she overcomes his or her mental or physical limitations. It's a standard that we don't apply to everyone else. Now, great achievement is laudable in anyone. Running across Canada or climbing a mountain, if you're disabled, that's a laudable thing with disabled people as well as anyone else. But the problem is that seems to be the only way that we celebrate disabled people or look at their struggle.
Okay, you mentioned in the book the MS Telethon and with Jerry Lewis. I noticed it was covered in a recent disability rag.
Oh, right.
Would you tell us why you believe it's wrong? It seems to be very effective in raising money for a worthy cause.
Well, I don't know if I think it's wrong. I see, as a journalist, I think the whole dispute over the telethon is interesting because here you have, as you mentioned, Jerry Lewis has raised $1 billion for MDA, and I can't think of anyone ever who's ever raised that much money for a cause. That's an incredible amount of money. And right now, a lot of the scientific research that MDA has done has led to some stunning breakthroughs. They're at sort of the height of their scientific work. But at the same moment that that's happening, you have this disability rights movement of disabled people seeing themselves in a different way, and suddenly they don't like the telethon. So that's a clash that, for me as a journalist, is interesting. Now, I would say this about telethons. One thing that I think is of concern, I think it's true. I think telethons divide the world between the lucky and the unlucky, between us and between them. And what disabled people say about the telethons, the disabled people who don't like the MDA telethon, they say the telethon is really raising barriers. It's raising attitudinal barriers because it's playing on people's pity. It's presenting disabled people as leading these sad lives so that we will open our wallets and give more money. But by doing that, it tells people that these disabled people are going to die, they're sick, they're sad, they're unfortunate. It makes us feel sorry for them. When we give charity, that's not something that really makes us change the way we lead our lives. It doesn't make us think about whether social service systems really give the support that people and their families are looking for. It raises barriers, attitudinal barriers, suggests that these people are incapable. Not all, I don't think that you have to use pity to raise money. And it's interesting that some other telethons, other charities that imitated MDA and started their own telethons, the National Easter Seal Society, United Cerebral Palsy Associations, they have taken a much more of an advocacy approach in their telethons. The National Easter Seal Society, for example, doesn't have a poster child, but they have what they call a representative adult and a representative child, and they show people, these people being more integrated in their community. And anyway, Easter Seals has changed the tone of the telethon, and they've doubled the amount of money they raise. Now, the MDA telethon is also changing. That's we have to be fair and note that they are listening more now to what disabled people are saying, and they're changing, but they have not done the type of advocacy that UCP and Easter Seals has done. Their focus has been more on finding raising money to find a medical cure. And they also provide services to people with dystrophic conditions. But the other telethons, I think, have changed much more quickly.
Okay. Okay, some of the people have told you that they would not want to be cured, if that's the right word, of their disability, if it were possible. Would you explain how they feel or how they arrive at that?
Yeah, that's always surprising to people who aren't disabled.
Yes.
I'd asked a woman named Cindy Jones, who had polio when she was young. I asked her if somebody invented a pill overnight that would wipe away your disability, would you take it? And she said no. Right away she said no. She said, that's like asking a black man or a black woman, would you change the color of your skin? Well, nobody in this country says that it's easy to be an African American. There's discrimination, there's prejudice, there's an underestimation of your capabilities. Well, those are all the issues that disabled people feel too. Now, Cindy Jones would say, we have to feel good about who we are. She would say the fact that I use this, she uses a three-wheeled scooter, she'd say the fact that I use this, that I've been disabled, it's really shaped me the way I am, and I want to feel good about myself. I don't want to hold out hope for some elusive cure which is not going to, that she never expects to see in her life. She doesn't say, she says disability is not easy, it's difficult, but we have to claim who we are. I start my book out by talking about an incident where a leader in the disability rights movement, a man named Tim Cook, who was a very gifted attorney, died, and at his funeral, a lot of some old friends of his got up, and they made speeches that would start by saying, I never thought of Tim as disabled, or he was the least disabled person I ever met. Well, that's the highest compliment that we as non-disabled people typically give a disabled person. But some of the people at that funeral service reacted. They were sort of startled, because to disabled people, it's not a compliment. It'd be like telling a Jewish person, I don't think of you as, you don't act like you're Jewish, or a woman, you don't seem, you're different than other women. And and it's not, we would never say that and think that's a compliment to someone else. Well, that, to me, that disabled people are thinking that way is a sign of that there's an emerging sense of a group identity.
Okay. Back to ADA, you said a lot of people, and I've heard it myself, don't understand why a building would have to be made accessible when there are no disabled people in the area. Do they have a point there?
Well, we don't see a lot of disabled people around often, because it is a segregated group. It is a group that finds it hard to get around, hard to get onto public transportation. 70%, or 66% of disabled people are unemployed. And 2/3 of those told pollster Lou Harris that they can work and want to work, but they don't get jobs because either they can't get to work, or an employer doesn't think they can do the job and doesn't hire them. So they're not in evidence. There are 35 to 43 million disabled people. So it's something that touches every family. So they're there, but if we're not an integrated community, we don't see them very much. I was thinking about this recently. I went to a baseball game at Camden Yards in Baltimore, our new baseball stadium. And when they built the new stadium, they made a conscious effort to put in more seating for wheelchairs. At the old stadium they had 50, at this one they have 500. So now when you go to the game, you see all these people in wheelchairs that you never saw before. And so where did they come from? It's not that there was an outbreak of paraplegia between the World Series and opening day. It's because Baltimore's stadium made an effort to have seating, and then made a point of letting people know that seating was available. And it's seating that now, if a person in a wheelchair comes with a spouse or a son who's not disabled, it used to be the dad had to be in the back and the kid could go sit up. So now they can sit together. So many more disabled people are going to ball games. So I think of the line, to paraphrase the line from Field of Dreams, build it accessible and they will come.
And it's good for business.
It's great for business. Oh yeah, they're making a lot more, they're making more money on this. So we often assume, because we don't see disabled people, that we don't need these innovations. And by the way, the other thing is that disability is, as many disabled people like to say, is the one minority that all of us can join at any moment. And in fact, disabled people have a sort of a mocking nickname, I guess, that they use to refer to non-disabled people. They refer to us as TABs, the temporarily able-bodied, meaning that, you know, if we get live long enough, we probably will experience disability. So these things that are being done are things that will help us in the long run. And by the way, that's the problem. We often fight these accommodations for disabled people by saying, well, you know, it's just a small number of people. It's not going to help a lot of people. Why? It's expensive. But think about some of the things that we do for disabled people. Curb cuts. If you go out on a corner and look at who uses curb cuts, it'll be a small number of, you might not see very many people come by in wheelchairs, but mothers with kids in baby strollers, bicyclists, people who just want to not step over a curb. So it's really a convenience for all of us.
Okay, another story that kind of struck me was on Larry McAfee, a quadriplegic who wanted to commit suicide rather than cope with a system that denied him the right to work and make his own decisions. You know, why did most Americans support his decision when it's a very hot topic?
Well, Larry McAfee, the Larry McAfee case, I think, shows just how much we automatically undervalue the lives of disabled people, and it's something that's automatic. It's the way we've been socialized, I think, to think about people with very severe disabilities. Larry McAfee became a severely disabled, a quadriplegic, dependent on a respirator as a result of an actually a motorcycle accident when he was about 34 years old. He went, as you mentioned, he went to court and he got the right to die, to turn off the respirator. Basically, the state of Georgia, where he lived, said you can have somebody help you, assist you in your suicide, to help you take this respirator out. He had actually invented a device that would turn off the respirator, but he wanted someone to, he could do it himself, but he wanted someone to give him some medication before he did that. And this was basically assisted suicide. The state of Georgia, the court said that Larry McAfee should have this right because his life was, he could not expect a quality of life. And it basically ruled that the respirator was medical treatment, and to turn it off was to end this medical treatment. Anyway, he got the right, and he never used it. Why not? Because Larry McAfee really didn't want to die. What he was concerned about was that he'd lost control of his life. He'd been sent from one nursing home to another, and he was living in the intensive care ward of a hospital. He wanted to get out and live in his own apartment. That's what he's doing now. He's succeeded. He's living on his own and working too, by the way.
Okay, I want to thank you today. I think our half hour is up already.
It went quickly.
Thank you for joining us. This has been Joseph Shapiro, the author of No Pity.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.